All right, so today we are going to hear from Lucas Marquez. Lucas started his career here at Microvellum as a support agent and has worked his way through to being one of our report specialists and data development analysts. So for the next hour or so, we're going to be learning about Report Designer and the tools that we have in there. The information that will be covered today is more on the basic side of things. So if this is the first time that you've really taken a look at Report Designer, or maybe want to get a little bit more information about how the basic tools work, maybe to teach others at your office or at your shop, this information should be just what you need to get started. So Lucas, you ready to get things started here? Thanks for joining us.
All right. Can everybody see my screen here with Toolbox up and loaded?
Yep, we see it. It looks good.
All right, perfect. So just to set the environment a little bit here, what I'm running here is Toolbox OEM 2018, and I'm on a 15.5 version, which is going to be released here in the next few months. So there's just a couple small differences with the Report Designer in this version versus 15.4, which I'll go over. They're not very big differences, but they are small differences you want to be aware of. So as Clay was saying, we're going to be going over some very basic things about Report Designer today, just to get you familiar with the UI. A few things we're going to be talking about here are just how to launch the Report Designer, the different options you have available to you when you do launch a Report Designer, some of the basic report configuration tools that are available to you, how you can set up the Report Designer with different toolbars, different quick launch buttons to work in a way that works for you. And then we're going to finish it up by creating just a basic label report as a roll feed report. And then from there, we're going to move it on and we're going to convert that roll feed to a sheet label report. So here in Toolbox OEM 2018, and same with the other OEM versions, to launch the Report Designer, you're going to go to the Toolbox Setup, Design Reports, and in the 15.5 version, you're going to have 3 different report categories. In 15.4, you're going to have a few more report categories that are related more towards their operational modules, such as the estimating, scheduling, and factory reports. But in Toolbox, the only 3 reports you're really going to be using are manufacturing reports, product labels, and place part labels. So for today, what we're going to do is we're going to design a product label report, and we can launch the Report Designer for those product labels by selecting that button. So the reason why there's 3 separate buttons here for this is based on the type of report that you design, it's going to show up in a different section or a different utility within the program. So if you design a manufacturing report, that's a report that you can view by using the Reports button in the Processing Center. If you design a product label report, it sets it to a category that'll let you print it out as a product label. And the same thing for the part label. So here we'll do a product label report. And now when we create the report, it's going to be categorized as a product label report in the database to be opened correctly. When you launch the Report Designer, you have 6 buttons here at the bottom. 2 of those buttons are not going to be enabled until you're in a report. So when you first start it, you're going to have the 3 buttons to the left that you're going to be using. The first button is a new report from existing. And when you select that button, you'll be greeted with the list of reports that are available for that report category. So here I have a product label and a product label dynamic image. If I select the product label, I'm then get the report setup screen where I'm able to give it a name. I'm just going to add a 2 to the end of this one. And one thing you'll notice whenever you do a new report from an existing, when it loads the database tables, it brings in all the tables that were selected for the report you used as a template. So those are going to automatically be enabled. If we do a new report, we're greeted directly with the project setup screen. It's not asking us to select a report as a template. So we're able to give it a name here. So we'll just call this a product label live event. And the difference with this one is as we go through the different database types and select the tables, we're not going to have any of the tables already selected. So we're going to be required to go through and select it. So for this product label here, because we're just doing a basic report, we're just going to select the products table. That way we can just bring in some basic product information such as the item number, the name of the product, and its dimensions, and the product image. A couple other options that we have here are these 2 buttons down here, or these 2 checkboxes at the bottom. The first checkbox is a is batch report. And the is batch report button is used if you are processing multiple batches in one work order. And by having that button enabled, what will happen is whenever you preview the report or you print out the report in the processing center, before the report loads, it's going to come up and ask you to select which batch you want to view them for. So if you did process multiple batches If you don't have that as batch report, then you may have, several different, or you may have, if you have 2 products and you process 3 batches, you'll get 6 labels. But if you have is batch selected and you select the batch, then it'll only print out the labels related to that current batch that you processed. The second checkbox here, hide in report list, will essentially hide the report from the interfaces in the processing center. One reason to use this is if you have a report that you're currently developing, but you don't want it to be available for someone to print out in the processing center, or you want to just avoid confusion, you can have that option selected, and the report will still be available in the report designer. It just won't show up as a printable report in the processing center. There's also an apply pre-filters button here. As you can see with the products and the work orders, that apply pre-filter button is not enabled. But if we go to the Microvellum factory and we select the products table here, well, that's supposed to be enabled. Not sure why it's not being enabled. I'll have to check that one out here. But the pre-filter button, what that will do, oh, there we go. So what the pre-filter button will do is it allows you to select a filter for the specific table that'll filter it out before the report loads. So oftentimes what this will do is it helps the report load faster, because instead of loading all the data for that table and then filtering out in the report itself, what we're telling it to do is when it builds the data set in memory, it's going to apply those filters ahead of time, and then it'll help the report load faster automatically. So here we have our products table selected, and we gave it the report a unique name here. So I'm just going to hit OK, and that report will go through and get created. I can then go and open up that report that we just created here. Whenever you select the report, it's going to ask you, because this is a because this is a report based off of a work order. We selected the products table from the work order database. It's going to come up and it's going to ask us for a work order to select, to load some data in there to help us configure the report. So here I'm just going to select this work order that I created earlier today that has about 5 products in it. And we'll see that we don't have anything showing up here on the report yet because we haven't really configured anything in there. Once we have a report open, we'll see that the 2 buttons to the right here became enabled. The Edit Data Source button will allow us to go back into the report setup and enable more tables or disable more tables or enable one of the options previously. And the designer will launch the report designer for the label that we have currently selected. So we'll click the designer button and we'll get into the report designer interface here. So as with every program that's out there, there's a lot of different configuration options that you can do to configure it to work well for you. So one of the things that I like to do is to modify the grid. And the grid here is just the grid that's showing up here on the page. And I modify it because I think by standard it comes in at 1/10 of an inch. And so we can go in here to File and then Options. And the Options page has a lot of different option or configurable options that you can select for the report designer. Here you can see some of the default options I have for my main screen are to show my headers, which are here, the rulers up on top, the rulers. We can also show order if we want to. And what the order is going to do is as we place components on there, it'll give us a numerical order showing us what order these are going to be printed in. So I'm going to enable that here too. If we go to the grid option here, the grid's going to show us a couple other things. So align to grid is going to have components automatically snap to certain points on the grid when they're placed on there. So I usually have that enabled just because that helps configure the report a little bit easier. If you have show grid disabled, then your grid disappears and you're just placing components on there however you want to place them. So I'm going to go enable that one again here. And one thing I do is I change this option here to a 1/1000th of an inch versus 100th. So by default it comes in at 100th, and so what we're going to be able to see here is our grid is slightly bigger than what I had it set to previously. And so while this is good, it makes placing objects very easy. It doesn't always allow the fine tuning of how you want these objects placed, and a lot of times you want to be able to fine tune it just right. So one of the things I do is I come in here to the grid and I change that to give me a smaller grid size. And that just helps me fine-tune my placement on there and get it exactly just right how I want it to. I'm also a little bit OCD about it too, so that might not be something you need to do. A couple other options here, the quick info. The quick info will display certain information on the components that you drop on there. For mine, I have show events because events are something that I use when I'm configuring my reports. You can also have it show some of these other options as well, but usually the events is going to be the most useful in my opinion. There is auto-save options if you want to enable auto-saving. You just select that button and you can select how often you want it to auto-save your report. This can be good, just so that way you know that there's an auto-save happening and you won't lose any of your report information if you close out on accident without saving. And the GUI just goes through and it'll change the look of the report designer. So if I were to go to, let's say Office 2007 Black, and I restart report designer here. Oh, wrong report. Go into the live event. And you'll see it just changes the layout of the report. The visual graphical user interface. That's what GUI stands for there. So, and I'm going to go through and I'm actually going to change that back here. Oh. And it also changed my menu options here. So there's options. We'll just go back. I'm going to change that back to Office 2013. Because Office 2013 is what I'm used to. So I know where everything is exactly for that. So as you can see so far, there's a lot of different things you can do to help, configure the report designer to, work for you. Here on the left-hand side, you have your tool strips. You can see I have quite a few different things enabled on my tool strips. And the tool strips just give you a quick access button, to quickly go in and add different components to your report. All of these components are available from these drop-down menus as well. And you can change which components are on there by hitting your little tool strip button here at the bottom. And you'll be able to enable what you want or what you don't want to show up. So usually your most commonly used ones are going to be there. And as you can see, I have a lot of them that I commonly use. So I have them all there as well. At the top of the screen here, you have several different tabs. These tabs have different components that you can use, such as borders, alignments, fonts, that'll help change, the look of the label itself once it's being rendered. The page setup lets you define the margins you want to use, the orientation of the page, whether you want it portrait, landscape, different sizes. If you want columns enabled, if you maybe want a watermark on your report. Also here you'll see we have some view options, which we saw in the options page, such as show grid, align to grid, show headers, grid modes. You can do lines versus dots. There's also quick info, which we saw in the options page as well. So there's several different ways of accessing the same type of information that you need. There's also a panels option, and the panels option here is what launches on the right-hand side our dictionary, our properties, and our report tree. So if there's some that we don't want to see, we can just disable those, and we'll see our properties went away there, and we can bring our properties back up. So starting here on the panels, the first panel that we have here is the dictionary, and the dictionary panel has all the information related to data. So any data that you're going to be working with or any functions or methods you're going to be working with are going to be accessed from the dictionary. And what I mean by data specifically here is our products table, which is what I selected when I set up the report. So I'm able to access my products table and any information that is in that products table. Other types of data that you can use in here as well are business objects, if you can configure those. Those are a little more of an advanced topic, so we're not going to be talking too much about those today. We also have variables, which variables are used to store data. So you could use a variable in an event and store some data in there to be rendered on the report. You can add a new variable by right-clicking and selecting new variable, giving it a bit of information in here. There's several different types of data that you can store in a variable, so you want to make sure you set that up for the type of data you're storing. But we're not going to get too far into that because those are more advanced topics there. You also have access to different system variables. The system variables are good for putting certain information on there, such as the date. If you print out a report and you want to have the date it was printed out on, you would put today. There's also the page N of M. These are going to give you the page number, so you'll see this is page 1 of 6, 2 of 6, 3 of 6, etc. So a lot of different system variables that you can actually use in here for the report. And then finally, you have different functionalities. And these functionalities are functions that are written by Stimulsoft that do something with the data. So there you have date functionalities, which will show different days of the week for a certain date that's available. So if in the database you have a date related to it, this would normally be associated with like a factory report in one of our operational modules, such as the estimating module or the scheduling module, where we have a date assigned to an activity. You can use these different date functions to format that or calculate times between different dates. There are different math functions. So if you want to be doing some roundings or some, floor, you want to get the floor of a decimal number or a double, you can use different math functions available as well. There are programming shortcuts, which are used quite often. The programming shortcuts are things such as if statements or select cases or like a choose. And those just give you programming. So programming shortcuts so that you can make decisions using one of those. So, if an object is true, then do something, otherwise do something else. So those get used quite often in our reports. And I'm sure you'll see the if statement all over the place if you were to open up one of our existing reports. There's different string functions that you can do. So if you have a string that's coming in from the database and you want to replace certain things in there, you can do that. One of the common things we use that for are in, are in like product prompts, because the product prompts in the database is the spaces are stored with underscores. So often what you'll see in some reports that use product prompts is we can use the replace function to replace underscores with spaces, which will just format the report to be a little more human readable. And finally, we have total functions, which will give you totals, sums, average, medians, maxes, different math functions, just the total data together on the report. The next section available from the panels is your properties. And your properties is going to show the properties for the different components that you have selected. So for example here, if I select this blank space off to the right of the report, what this is going to give me, it's going to give me the properties for my report as a whole. So I'm going to see all the properties there that I can do and I can change. One of the things that I come in here and I change pretty often is the script language. I'm a Visual Basic programmer. I don't really program in C# too often, so I come in here and I replace that and I select VB as my script language. That's important to do because if you have the wrong script language and you're writing some type of event to happen in Visual Basic code, it's not going to launch properly because we'll have the incorrect script language, won't know how to read it. If you were in the last report class we did, I actually ran into a problem like that, and I wasn't sure how to fix it at first, and I realized after the fact that I had the wrong script language set, which was why my event function hadn't been working. If we select the white space on the page, we get our page properties. And our page properties give us different formatting options such as the margins, the page sizes, page widths, different options that we can do. So for example, if this is a product label. So if we wanted to configure this product label as a roll feed label, we can either modify the properties here from the properties screen, or we can just double click on the page itself and we'll get the same properties available to us just in a little different type of format. So there's a couple things that I can do in here and change. So I'm going to leave it in letter. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to make this a 4x1 label, and I'm going to keep it in my portrait, and I can change my margins if I want to. I'm going to leave my margins there where they're at for now. If I wanted to have multiple columns on my page, I can come in, I can select multiple columns, give it a column width, column cap, and again, if I wanted to add a watermark, I could add a watermark to my report. I'm not going to do anything with my columns just yet because this is going to be a roll feed, so there's no need for columns. But in a later step, whenever we go through and switch our columns to, or whenever we switch our roll feed to a sheet report, we'll be playing with the columns and showing you how to do that there. So here I have my width and height set to 4x1 with portrait. So when I hit OK to that, we'll see that my report here shrinks in size, and I'm left with a very small amount of room here. So I am actually going to get rid of my margins here. So I have just a full 4x1 report. I'm just going to zero those out. And there I have my 4x1 with my printable area. Let me see if we have any questions yet. we do not. If you do have any questions, feel free to ask those questions in that question panel there, and we will get them answered as best as possible. So to add data to this report, I'm going to go to my dictionary because I'm going to be working with data, and I only selected my products table here because I'm making a product report. There might be other information you want to add to this, but we're not going to be talking about database relationships or table relationships in this report training session. So we're just going to work with one table alone, and it's going to be our products table. So to tell the report that we're going to be bringing on information about products, we just need to select our products table from the dictionary panel and drag that onto our report placement. Once I let go of that, we'll see that my data band gets named data products, my data source is my products. I can then select which data I want to bring onto here. So I'm just going to bring on some basic information that I would need, such as my item number, the name of my product, probably want the quantity as well. I'm going to bring the quantity up above that name. And then, actually, I'm going to bring the quantity up to the top, quantity item under name. And then width, height, and depth. So just some basic information. If we had some comments saved to our products, our comments would be showing up here. We can bring those in as well. I don't have any comments on mine, so I'm not going to bring in that data in. So we'll hit OK there. Down here at the bottom, actually, before I hit OK, down here at the bottom, we have this option for a header and a footer. So if we do a header and a footer, what this is going to do is going to add to my data band a header band and a footer band with different titles on there, such as quantity, item number, name, width, height, depth. So the header and footer are good to use if you're using more of like a basic manufacturing report where you want to have titles to your report where you can see information. So because this is a label, we don't really need headers and footers, so I'm going to leave those unchecked for now. And we'll see that that brings in my data here. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to readjust this here for a second. One thing you'll notice here is that whenever I dropped on my data band, my report pretty much doubled in size and I got this red line here. So the reason that it does that is because, so the red line is telling you what's the printable area. And essentially what happens is because if I go into this, if I go to the properties of this data band and say, okay, I know this is a 1-inch high report, so I'm going to make this a 1-inch data band. You can see that extends here below the red line, but it's because also I have this title up on the top with this band. So it wants to allow me to have the full space to be able to work with and develop my report. And it lets me know that by having that red line that I can keep adding more information to it. So here I'm just going to reorganize some of my data here. I'm going to have the quantity, item number, bring the name down here to the bottom, extend that out a little bit, and maybe I want my width, height, and depth up here. And then one thing I'm also going to bring in is I'm going to bring in an image here because I want to be able to have an image of my product show up here. So I'm going to minimize those down here. And so the way I'm doing this here and adjusting all three at once is I held down the control button and I selected the components I wanted to use. And then I came over to the right-hand side of my components and started dragging and dropping them. So that allows me to actually adjust the size of multiple components at once and save some time there. And so since I know my width, height, and depth are just numbers, they're not going to be very large, I'll just shrink those down a little bit here. And what I want to do now is I also want to add on an image component. And it doesn't look like I have an image component on my toolbar. So I'm just going to come up here to my top section and I'm going to drop on an image component, draw it the size that I want, and then it's going to have me select an image. So there's a couple things I can do here. I can select an image from on disk. I can open up a file and say, okay, I want to select one that's on my computer. That's not what I want to do though, because obviously I want to bring in the image related to my product. So what I'm going to be doing is using the data column so I can bring it in from the database. So I can extend my products, and as I go down to the bottom here, I'm going to have these WMF stream and WMF name. So I'm going to bring in the WMF stream, which is our image file in the database. And when I do that, we can see the image that gets brought in with that product there. And so now that I have that there, if I preview this report, we're going to see that I have just some basic information here. I have my one door bases. at the top. I have an open base here with its image, its width, height, depth, item number, quantity, one door base, and a two door base. So just a very simple, quick and easy way to configure these reports to get a roll feed on there. So we'll go back to page 1. If you wanted to adjust some of these components here, I could select the ones that I wanted to adjust. Maybe I want a different font on here for it. We can do something like Georgia font here instead, maybe make it a little bit bigger. And we'll be able to see how that font changes. Some of the other options that we could use if we want to configure our report a little bit differently, we could use borders. By selecting the border, what we're going to have is we're going to have a border around each of those components. So there's just different little configurations that you can do with that. Another thing that we can do in here is using our style designer. The style designer is pretty neat. It allows you to select certain types of styles. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a style in here, and it's just going to be a component style. And I'm going to make this style, I'm just going to change the color of this component here. Actually, we're going to do the brush for the border. And so I'm just going to make this what's a good color? Let's do peach puff. So I'm going to have this style here. It's a peach puff. And you'll see here how I can use that. So what I can do with this is I can select my data band. And if I'm at my properties panel of my data band, I can see all the properties related to it. And there's actually an option in here called odd style and even style. And so what I can do with these is I can have multiple styles set up, and I can say, okay, well, my odd style is going to be a certain color. So now whenever I preview my report, I have every other one is going to be a different color for that. You wouldn't necessarily do this with a product label, but if you have like a list report, you could have a list report showing all your products and have every other one different color. Just makes it a little more human readable there. So I'm going to take that off here though, because I don't like how that looks very much. So we'll leave no style there. And so there we have our basic report. So let's say we have a label in our database. Maybe there's one, a part label that you have in there. As you've seen, we have about 20, 30 part labels. Some of them are roll feeds, some of them are sheets. So let's say there's a label in there that's a roll feed, and we want to convert that to be a sheet label. We'll go over how to do that right now. It's not very difficult. So the first thing that we're going to want to do is we're going to want to change our page setup. So what I'm going to do here to get to my page properties, a little bit different than the other one, is I'm going to use this drop down, and I'm going to select my page that's there. From here, what I can do is I can then start changing some of my options. So I'm going to make my page 8.5 by 11 again. We'll make this a little bit bigger, 8.5 by 11, so that I have a full page again. So now if I preview my report, what I'm going to get is I get all my labels here on one sheet instead of a roll, because that was the printable area that I gave it to. But maybe we want to have two separate columns here instead as well. So what we can do is we can also come in and say, okay, well, I want to have some columns on here. So we can add two columns, and maybe we need a column gap here of 0.125. And you know what, let's put our margins back in here as well. So we can say 0.36, oh, cancel, 0.36. And so we can see here that I need to make some adjustments to my report here because I have some components that are falling off. So I'm going to actually use up more of the space that I have here. Let's drag that below, drag that over here. And so now whenever I preview that, we'll see that I have, well, I don't have enough labels to show you completely here. And actually, let me make one more change. It's a little bit easier to see. I'm going to take off my borders from those components. I'm going to add a border to my data band. So I'm going to select my data band's header here, and I'm just going to add a border around that. So we'll preview that. So there you'll see that I have, you know, each of my labels here showing up. If I had more data, I probably should have had more data. I apologize for that. We would have seen that it would stretch down and then move over here to the next page. I believe there is another option here as well. Let's see. Column directions, here we go. So the column direction property is a pretty cool one to use. So I'm going to do across then down. And so what that should do, it's not doing what I wanted it to do. Oh, I know why. Let's do this a little bit differently here. So I'll show you what we can do here. So because I have the component set up to the page, so what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to come in here and I am going to see where's my columns. Let's lower this down to one column again. And what I'm going to go to my data band itself, and I'm actually going to make columns within my data band here. So I'm going to do 2 columns with a column gap of 0.125. And so now what this will do, because my actual data band is what's set up with my column information, I'm actually able to use my data band's property of across then down. And then with that, if I preview the report, then I'll be able to get my labels due to across. So it'll fill up both on the top, across, and then all the way down. So you can see how there's several different ways of being able to configure a report. You can do the columns on the page itself. You can do the columns on the data band. So several different ways you could do that. So let's see, we got a couple questions here. So first question, how could you add the letters to the dimensions with height depth? So we do that in a couple different ways. So here I actually brought in my dimensions to each have an individual component itself. So what I would need to do with that if I wanted to add it is I'd have to go into each component. Let me get that back here. So I could come into here and say, okay, so I'm going to go to my expression. And then outside of these curly brackets, the curly brackets indicate that anything within those curly brackets is part of an expression. So because I just want to add a letter, what I'm going to do is outside of those curly brackets, I'm going to come in here and I'm going to add a W. And then for my width, for my height, I'm just going to come out of the curly brackets again, do H for height. And here I'll do a D for depth. And now if we preview that, we'll see we have width, height, and depth. Another way that we can handle this as well is to have these all be on one component that's just extended out. So then what we could do is we could do width, height, depth. And then from my dictionary here, this dictionary is going to be the same dictionary that's down here at the bottom. It just provides it here. That way you can easily drag and drop. I'm going to go to my product and say, okay, I want my height to come in. I'm going to drag it right where the height is. And then I want my depth to come in as well. Oh, there we go. And so now there we have it all on one component. And so if we preview that, we'll get the same type of results with height and depth. What this is nice to do is because then, I can drag around that one component as a whole. I don't have to worry about it. It's kind of grouping that together. I can also go through and change some of the different styles, the text, the size, and it's adjusting that component as a whole, and I don't have to make sure I do each one individually. So again, several ways of doing the configuration and getting it all set together. Let's see, we got another more. We have a label printer that prints a 1x5x4 label. Yeah, so if it prints a 1x5x4, it depends if it's a roll feed or not. But it would be the same thing if you go to your page setup. The page setup is going to have the width and the height, so you would just set those dimensions there. So if the height of that label is 1.5, you would do a 1.5 height. The width would be a 4. So just like we did it with the 1x4, just a different dimension there. Can I define a border for each label? Not sure exactly what you mean there. So, I'm assuming we're talking about the borders here. So you can't have one border for an individual label on one data band. So what you're doing is you're assigning the border to the data band, not the label itself, or not the data itself, to the data band. So if you wanted to have different borders for different labels, you would probably have to have like a second page configured with its own data band that has its own border style set up to it. I hope that answers that question there. And then on a sheeted label, there's often a scrap border area around the usable area. Can you define a border so you know you will not be printing on the said scrap area? Yeah, so that's going to be the margins that we had talked about. So there's the margins, there's the page margins, which will specify that. There are also, the column gap here. One thing, if you needed to add some space in between it, it's pretty easy to do. You can just extend this out. Maybe, there needs to be, this was a 1 inch high label. So maybe there's a say a 1/4 inch gap. So we can just say it's 125. But just make sure you don't put anything below that. And then what that'll do is that should, let's see, put that back down to 1 actually. There might be a better way of doing that. Let's see, column gap width. What you might be able to do actually is to use a child band. Not a child band. Let's do an empty band here. I'm not sure. I might have to talk to Doug about that one a little bit later and see what he thinks, and then maybe send that out with the video tomorrow. Let's see if a footer band will do it. So just make that a little bit bigger there. No, yeah. So I'll have to confer with Doug, who's the report admin. I'm pretty sure he'll be able to give me an answer to that one. We had a question here from Linda. Where did you go to add the image? So here, I'll delete this image component here really quick. So to add the image, there's these little buttons here on the left-hand side. The ones at the 5 buttons at the top will always be there. They aren't part of the toolbar. So if you go to the 3rd button down, the components are going to have everything from text to the image. So I did the image, and then I drew out the size I wanted that image to fill. And then from there, I was able to select where I wanted to bring that image from, whether I wanted to bring it in from a hyperlink, such as a web page, a file on the computer, or if I wanted to bring it in from the database. More often than not, you're going to be using the database, and so you're able to go into that table that we selected, which was the products, and then the WMF stream is the image file. And same thing for the parts. So if you go to the parts table, you're going to have a WMF stream in there as well, which is for the parts. So we can select that, and that'll bring the image in there for that one. Yeah, and then the program names, those are stored in the database under the parts table. So we're not getting too much into the parts. Setting up a part label requires setting up table relationships and data band relationships. And we're trying to stay away from that one for this training, because this one is really more for the basic level of getting familiar with the UI, getting familiar with the different components that are available. So we'll probably be covering that one in a future live event. So yes, that's about all I had for you guys here, guys and gals. I hope that was beneficial. I'll try to answer any more questions as they're coming in. And then Clay, I'll hand it back over to you.
All right, thanks, Lucas. As always, I think you did a great job at showcasing some of the basics here with Report Designer, even getting into some configuration, so that was good. So actually, today's event was requested by our users. We had an event similar to this a little bit ago, and they wanted a little bit more basic level. So hopefully this did the job for you. We plan on having some other classes that will get a little bit deeper, more into intermediate and advanced topics. We'll even cover some more report setup and configuration workflows. So if you feel you might be ready to move on to the next level, be sure to register for those classes. Let me go ahead and take back over presenter here. All right, so as Lucas mentioned, we will, it's about 11:45 Pacific time here in Oregon, so we will continue to keep this open a little bit. If you guys have some questions, I can still see actually a few of them popping in here. So we'll go ahead and keep this open a little bit longer. But before we conclude the audio and visual part of this, of today's event, I just want to talk to you about, to highlight another event that we have coming up in August. So on the 30th and 31st of August, we will actually be having a regional training event in Kitchener, Ontario. And this one's going to be hosted by Conestoga College. They're going to be implementing a woodworking program there at that college, and we are going to be using their facility there to launch this regional training event here up in Canada. So this event will cater to those who are just wanting to get started with Microvellum, as well as those who are looking for some advanced training. We'll have some trainers on site that can help answer your questions and point you on the right direction. We'll also have some CNC demonstrations and a tour of their wood technology shop at the college. So for more information about this, if you want to register, you can go to our website to learn more about it. So also, as you exit this webinar, don't forget to take that survey, the exit survey. Your feedback helps improve these events, so let us know how we did. We'll leave this open for a little bit longer, but I hope you have a great rest of your week, and we'll see you on our next Microvellum Live event.